right, John Maehl, we are on. So let's talk about Martin County Forever. Maybe who you are first, because folks that might be outside of the clean water politics and ecosystem or government may not know who you are and why you're important.
Sure.
But you are.
I wouldn't presume everyone in that circle knows either. So my name's John Maehl. I'm the Environmental Resource Administrator for Martin County, and I have, I think, the greatest job in the county. Our board, as a extension of our citizenry, has placed a super high priority on water quality, environmental lands, our coastal resources, the reef, the estuary, and our board has kind of tasked the Environmental Resources Division with doing everything we can to restore and maintain those in as best condition as possible. And so that, it's super satisfying. We don't have to search for where the reward is in our jobs.
What is your, so more broadly, what is your function maybe with the county?
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with the legislature? How do you advocate? What's your role?
Yeah, so that's part of it. The division handles, we kind of split it up into three compartments, I suppose is probably the cleanest way for people to grasp it. We have our environmental land section, which takes care of about 35,000 acres in the county, with exotic removal, with plantings for restoration, for wetland restoration, and then also providing low-impact recreational access. So a great example is that people are very familiar with is the Kiplinger Preserve, which is on Canner and Indian Street, and it's a handful of parking spots, some signage, and some unimproved trails. It's a way to engage with the real Florida and the resource that it's just hard to find in the metro area. So that's part of the division. There's the other part that deals with kind of all things water quality in Martin County. So there's a million acronyms that I'm going to avoid using as best I can, but there's some of our role is statutorily defined. So our entire stormwater system for the county has a permit, and we have certain conditions we have to meet as a permit holder for maintaining that system and for making sure that only water gets to the surface waters.
So DEP, South Florida Water Management kind of thing?
And EPA. Yep. Those three agencies kind of govern how we manage our stormwater and report that back. And so, for instance, one of the things we are tasked with is if there is a discharge event to the river, say, let's say a painting company has a spill in their parking lot and it makes it to the stormwater system, we're responsible for making sure that that's appropriately identified and remedied. We also have our fertilizer ordinance, which is kind of a one-of-a-kind. There's several counties along the Indian River Lagoon that have adopted fertilizer ordinance. We believe we have a very smart ordinance that's not overreaching, but it's largely centered on educating the public on how they can be part of the solution and not part of the problem. As a homeowner, if you've got non-native turf grass, you've probably had to fertilize it to keep it green. And our ordinance doesn't strictly prohibit it. It helps inform people how to most appropriately apply it. That lives with us. And then our Basin Management Action Plan engagement, which that's a long bureaucratic phrase, but the EPA established standards for probably our most significant pollutant and most damaging pollutant, which is nutrients. And the human cycle, wherever you touch it, seems to contribute more nutrients to the water, whether we're eating, whether we're making the food, whether we're getting rid of the food. What we do with our landscapes and lawns.
With the county, I know we're still sort of describing, more macro what you do, but I'd like to ask, with regard to BMAPs, the county engaging with BMAPs, it's not necessarily enforcing. Is it more reporting back to the state?
Yeah, it's a really interesting.
Without going too deep,
Yeah,
I was curious.
it's a really interesting relationship. So there is a standard that's set by the EPA with your total maximum daily load, and there is a responsibility. I use that word somewhat loosely because it's really difficult to define to what extent that responsibility is. But the state has a responsibility to meet that criteria. The way they've chosen to, and it's a national thing, TMDLs. The state of Florida, and each state approaches this differently, has decided to use a tool that Florida created called the Basin Management Action Plan, which engages stakeholders, local governments, FDACs, anybody that has some kind of land management component, to kind of, it's a little bit voluntary. Like they tell us, hey, we think you're responsible for this portion of the load reduction, and then we report back to them, this is how we think we can achieve that, and then the groups kind of just work together to affect those projects, to monitor the success. Basin management action plans have come under some scrutiny or criticism, because as we've been achieving that standard on paper, the actual measurement of the nutrients has been getting worse, and so it calls into doubt to some extent, are these the tool to get it done? I will say, I have some awareness of what's going around in the rest of the country. I think Florida probably has one of the best tools. It's just we need to
That's
do
good
more.
To
hear. Yeah, I know you don't hear that often.
No.
But there's a lot of states that just aren't doing anything, or they're phoning it in with really phony efforts. I mean, the state of Florida really has made a concerted effort, and Martin County in particular, as a partner with the state in this. I mean, we've built in Martin County 37 stormwater retrofits where you go into a neighborhood that was built before our current drainage standards. They were probably built on ag drainage, which depends on pretty much 100% permeable surfaces, where when you put in a neighborhood, you've got driveways and roofs and other things where the water
swale may not cut it.
Yeah, right. And so we go into those neighborhoods and we build stormwater features that help meet the standard that we now have today. That's kind of in a nutshell. It gets really sciencey pretty quickly, and every watershed's a little bit different. The constituent cocktail, if you will, is a little bit different in every basin. And so you have to engineer smart features to help deal with that specific basin. And so Martin County has spent over $80 million and done almost 40 projects to date. So, we're way out ahead of the curve on doing actual physical work in the basin to try and clean up that water.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's so much fun to be a part of. And one of the cool things about those is that they tend to be really aesthetic, enjoyable features. It's not like a wastewater treatment plant. We use natural systems. We mimic those systems when we engineer these things. And so it kind of ends up looking like parks and lakes. And, so much so that like the realtors, they often want to know where the next ones are going in, because it tends to help property value too. So they're really fun projects to work on. Very well supported. We get robust funding from the board for that, and a lot of encouragement, and then we go leverage that very effectively with state and federal dollars to stretch that. We 50-50 is our goal, but we often do much better than that. We're finishing a project that is pretty high profile because it's right on US 1 down in Hope Sound, East Fork Creek. We just wrapped up phase 1 of that. We're getting ready to break ground on phase 2. That project was, I think, in total close to, with phase 2, we're just getting those estimates in. I think we're looking at about $4 million for that project. I think we had about $500,000 in local money in that. So the group is super effective at pursuing grants, and they're great projects, and so they're easy to support. So while basin management, coming back, the BMAPs are often criticized as maybe not being enough. They are accomplishing some really great things. A lot of our septic to sewer was inspired by meeting those basin management action plan goals. That wouldn't have happened probably without that that tool being in place and us being a very proactive stakeholder in it. Our division also does advocacy, which you mentioned. The county has entrusted us with making sure that our interests are represented in state and federal legislation, with the Water Management District and prioritizing projects.
Mm-hmm.
Our board has a long history of supporting those. We have some very tenured commissioners who were there when SERP was being drafted, and one of our commissioners was at a hearing in D.C. in 2007, making sure that Indian River Lagoon South was a prioritized project, that it got a WRDA authorization, Water Resource Development Act authorization, and one of our commissioners was super instrumental in making sure that the natural lands component was included in that, and that resulted already in about 27,000 acres of.
I think you can say their name when it's a good thing, right? That they do.
Yeah, right. I wasn't here, so I sometimes forget who did what.
Fair enough. But we know at least one of them.
At least one of them. They just, every year when we have our priorities meeting, it seems from my perspective, we start out with, hey, water quality.
Yes.
And then, okay, what else are we going to prioritize? And so it's so rewarding to be in the position of leading an incredible group of dedicated, intelligent, ambitious project managers and scientists that are figuring out how to do great things for the water and for our environment.
The banner of your department, the name of your department exactly is?
Environmental Resources Division.
Yeah.
And we just had about 2 weeks ago, we had a strategic planning session where we sequestered ourselves away and really kind of disassembled who we are, what we've done, what we should be doing, and we're rewriting our mission statement. So I got about 10 versions of that.
What's the future then? After that meeting?
Yeah, the future really, so what recently happened was we combined the coastal division with the ecosystem division into this environmental resource division. There was just so much, I think, lost opportunity with symbiotics, where we had some overlap, or we were, chasing some of the same money, or we had projects that would complement one another. And there's a lot of camaraderie in the counties, among the county staff. And so we're working together, but not in a structured sense. Form wasn't following function. And so by combining these two divisions, I had a notepad actually on my desk when we started this. And on day one, I started making notes about added value from that combined division scenario. And after I got through 3 pages, I quit. It was incredible how many things we were able to capitalize on in a really short time, where projects got better. We built in some efficiencies. We were applying people at their highest and best use. And so that environmental resource division it's a broad division now that it includes our beach renourishment, it includes shoreline stabilization, our resilience program, it includes reef restoration, artificial reef, and now we have a new initiative. One of the things that came out of our strategic planning session was this interest in really ramping up our actual in-water reef restoration work. There's a whole bunch of new money and policies that help to encourage that, and we believe we're a legitimate local partner in that. And we've got the northern terminus of the Flora Coral Reef, and right outside our inlet. It's very accessible. It's maybe an area that's well poised for restoration work relative to the rest of the reef system, because as we saw last summer,
who pays for that?
Well, there's a lot of new state money that
like DEP.
Yeah, DEP has.
Because it seems like if you spent all that money refurbishing and bringing that reef back to life, that's now sort of this asset that you wouldn't want to damage with discharges.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, that's thinly veiled strategy. We do the same thing.
I will say it out loud.
Yeah, I love it. We're doing the same thing with. That's part of the inspiration for our seagrass planting efforts that we're getting ramped up. Is, it's
one more thing to consider. One more layer of we spent all that money. Let's maybe send a little more to the west.
I think of Mayor Giuliani's broken window concept from years ago when he was mayor of New York City. He made it a priority to not have broken windows on old warehouses because it encouraged the further defamation of those neighborhoods. So if we care about something, we've got to invest in it. We've got to make sure that value is retained. If we just let it go, even though you can make the argument there may be a low return on our investment for seagrass restoration right now because we've still got some water quality issues to work out. If we just give up on it, then there's no harm in them continuing to send discharges. So we've got to continue to build in that value to replace those windows and demonstrate that we care about it.
It seems like you could create an opportunity also because you guys are sort of dovetailed in with ecotourism, right?
Absolutely.
So it seems like you could have an opportunity to rehab those reefs for diving and make it an official site.
Absolutely. Yeah. Our vision, while we've got a lot of work to do on it, it's going to take some time, but with coral, and I probably would be getting the cart out of the horse to talk about it, but what the heck, the more people communicate about it, I think the more things come to fruition. Well, our vision is to try to create a partnership with a local college to create a program for training people in coral restoration.
Awesome.
The actual coral growing, the macrofragmentation process, and then the planting process. And we're working with NOAA on a certification for how that gets done and what's the appropriate way to do it so that we can get through permitting. And then we want to try to work with the state and the federal government to fund a grow facility right here in Martin County and train students, provide a place for people to come and be a kind of an epicenter for coral restoration, and then put this stuff out in the water ultimately. And we think because I don't know if you remember in July, we had some really warm waters in the everywhere, but in the Keys in particular. My kids are divers, so I remember the last week in July we were doing a whole bunch of diving before my son went back to school, and we dove down in the Keys, and in the Keys it was crazy it was real. The water really was hot, and you could see you could see the thermocline where the warm water was killing the reef. It was totally bleached out at this a certain depth, and even I think we were in our last dive in the Keys, we were in about 80 feet of water, and it was still in the mid 80s. It was weird. Up here, we were hitting 60-degree water at the bottom. So there's this cold water upwelling near us that I think maybe poises us to be a more resilient reef restoration location.
Great.
So if the state's going to make an investment, ideally we'd make an investment where it's more resilient.
I'm sure all of this is in the grant application.
Oh yeah, it will be. It will be. So we're assembling some really exciting partnerships right now on that, and it's just getting out of the blocks. We've got a new staff person who that's what she went to school for. She couldn't be more excited about engaging with this.
It seems like that's simultaneously the history of this area and the future, right? Is instead of looking at your parks and your natural resources as liabilities that are off the tax rolls and costing money, if they are these assets that are bringing in tourism that you're investing into.
When has a state park ever hurt a local economy?
Right, exactly.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So
kind of a contentious issue, if you're up for talking about it, would be bathtub.
Oh, yeah.
And what is your... because there's a lot of, I think, confusion about what's even going on. There's just frustration sort of boiling. Yeah. So I did want to ask you, so you could bathe us all in information.
No pun intended.
What is truly going on would be what's going on.
Yeah, you bet. So I've kind of learned this recently, and I'm not the point person on this, but we've got some good folks. So this is kind of a win, really. People are frustrated. I know that the beach has been closed, and it's a system that requires continual nourishment. The community has decided over and over again, despite frustration about having to reinvest in something repeatedly, that it's worth it. The consequences of not doing it are expensive to the community as well. So it's been our math that it's worth making that investment, and that's generally been supported. What's recently changed in that equation that's kind of exciting is last year the county engineered and built a seawall. It's kind of a smart seawall. If you go out, if you happen to be able to see it now, you can. It's exposed because the sand's all gone. But the wall did what it was supposed to do. It protected the road, the parking lot. The erosion only came so far. It hits the seawall, and it's kind of a smartly engineered wall that returns the wave energy back to the ocean, and it's very effective at dissipating it. And so, the restoration work that's going to start in a couple of weeks for the dune will bury that. You won't see it. It'll look just like it always did, but
until a big storm.
Until you have a big storm, but it mitigates the impact.
What about that house that's right there on the corner? It seems like the water, because that's our spot. That's where we go as a family. It seems like that water is flushing down that wall. Is there any plans to try to help protect that house on the corner? This may be getting in a little too deep.
Yeah,
but
I don't know if I have a good answer for that.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I know it about like you do, but I'd have to get back to you probably with the engineering behind that and what county.
I think those were some of the frustrations I've heard. Is it seems like the wall is doing its function of not sucking out the parking lot,
right,
and damaging the road, but it may also be sort of funneling water down and then out,
right,
across that.
Yeah, beyond my expertise. I'm surrounded by smart people. I'm not always the smart person.
That's the way to be.
There's a lot of times where I'm out in the community at it, like you call it a ribbon cutting or something, and someone will ask a question that my division should know the answer to, and I'm looking around. Somebody, I need a lifeline.
Talk to that guy.
Yeah,
he will know.
Yeah.
So what is Martin County forever? What is sort of the history of half-cent sales taxes? What's the history of this county investing in land?
Yeah.
What's going on right now?
You bet.
You're functioning as the technical.
I'm a technical advisor to the group. Yeah, there has to be a connection to the county because the county has to shepherd this thing, right? Although the county can't legally support or advocate for a referendum. It has to come through us. So the board would have to pass an ordinance establishing a referendum, and then that goes to the voters in the general election. And then the voters would make the ultimate decision about whether or not we'd move forward with a dedicated funding source for conservation lands. The history on that, it's exciting. This is how you contextualize it. We are who we are today in Martin County largely because of these efforts in the past. Martin County looks like it does largely because of previous funding for conservation lands. Let me give an example. The Lands for You tax referendum that passed, I believe, in 2006 is provided the funds that helped us acquire land for the C44 reservoir in STA, Alapata Flats, and what's probably most exciting about that success story, beyond that, we now have the first major Everglades restoration project largely complete in our backyard, providing benefits to the St. Lucie River and estuary. A lot of people around the state will say, how did you guys get so much interest so early? How did you guys get so much preferential treatment? Well, one of the reasons was our advocacy early on. They were at the table when Everglades restoration was being composed. Martin County and its citizens were extremely active in supporting that, but then they taxed themselves and contributed to those projects. No other local government has done that to date. And so we put, I want to say $16 million into the acquisition. No, it was $27 million of sales tax receipts from the Lands for You into the acquisition of the land for the C44 reservoir and STA. And by doing that, we really forced the Corps and the state to prioritize that project and to build it first.
I think that's a huge point. The C44 reservoir even exists because of efforts like what we're talking about today.
Hundreds of millions of dollars to build that project for the benefit of water quality in the St. Lucie River and estuary. Incredible habitat benefit. There's going to be a really, really profound recreational benefit there, and it cost us $27 million. So incredible return on investment. Alapata Flats, that 27,000 acre preserve, that our investment in that was $16 million, I believe, if I have my numbers correct. And again, to buy that today, hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right,
And
the sooner the better.
And so making that little investment early produced this incredible result that, guess what, lasts forever.
Mm-hmm.
It's there forever now. So no matter what you do with the maps in terms of the future of Martin County, those 27,000 acres are forever for the public benefit, for aquifer recharge, for habitat, for water quality.
Recreation, enjoying it.
Yeah.
Where are we looking at acquiring with this?
So the 4 program areas that Martin County Forever has identified, and their effort is to try to define this ordinance in such a way that that's all that's eligible. Mm-hmm. So they would be to continue to invest in the Indian River Lagoon South Everglades project, which would add to Allapattah Flats. There's still some lands out there that are ridiculously special natural lands, largely untouched. They were family ranches. They were kind of preserved for recreational land, what have you. So there's still some lands out there that would be incredible to add to the natural lands inventory. Another area is Palmar, which that's a whole show in itself. Probably it's a really complicated issue. Palmar, the name is indicative of the location. It's Palm Beach, Martin County. Mm-hmm. It's on the line on our southern border, and it's an area that was illegally platted back in like the 60s, and the lots were sold off all over the country. There's thousands of like quarter and half acre lots, and it wasn't allowed to be developed, and so you have this. There's no open roads. There's really no drainage. It's a bit of a quagmire, and there's a lot of ambiguity about its future. The county and the state made it a priority to acquire land in that to try and resolve that situation and ultimately make it available to the public. It would become part of Hungryland. And so that's an area where we still have a few thousand acres left to purchase to make it. There's already 3,000 acres of public ownership. There's about a few thousand left. That ideally through willing sellers would be nice to.
So on this map, we own the green, and we would be seeking the tan, just for clarification.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yep. That illustrates it quite well. So that'd be one of the areas. Loxalucy is another area that kind of represents the open space between Jonathan Dickinson State Park and Atlantic Ridge State Parks. Those are 2 fairly large state parks, relatively speaking, and by combining them, I coined the phrase a couple of years ago, we would create the first super park in the Florida park system and preserve a wildlife corridor, flyway, and recreational opportunity that's really pretty profound, considering it's on the lower east coast of Florida. When you look north or south of those areas, it's pretty intense development, but there you have this huge greenway that preserves the real Florida, preserves some native ecotypes that are just hard to find anywhere else, and some endangered species and incredible recreational values. So that'd be one of the.
You're hedging against overdevelopment in the future too.
You bet. I mean, if you put a state park there, it's not houses. That's certainly true. And then
I won't get you in trouble.
It's okay. The 4th area would be what we call blueways, which that's a little bit harder to define, but blueways tend to be areas where you can access the water. So historically, we acquired quite a few beach accesses through the blueways, places like Delaplane Preserve, Gomez, Pendarvis Park, Kiplinger. Those would be like the kind of like they're more in the urban area, but it provide access to water largely.
Are some of these or most of these undeveloped lots at this point?
Yeah, anything. We wouldn't be looking at anything that's been developed. This would be undeveloped stuff. There's really there's less and less of that
Right.
available, and the timeliness of it is pretty imperative.
And that's valuable real estate.
It is very valuable real estate. It's harder. We don't sometimes buy that stuff by the acre, or we buy it by the square foot, because it is it's smaller areas. They're very expensive. Now, it tends to be some of the areas we look at would be very challenging to develop because they tend to be wetlands and mangroves. And
if it's not developed at this point, there's a reason, probably.
Right.
So I know within just reading about what Martin County Forever's kind of guidelines are, you would have to have a willing seller.
Absolutely.
We're not doing any kind of eminent domain thing here.
Yeah, there's no appetite for that, and
So-
really you wouldn't want to bog it a program as neat as this down with that kind of baggage.
How much work has been going into, for what you have geo-fenced off, for what you would like to have, there might be opportunity there to purchase it.
Yeah, we kind of, though we don't have like a dedicated funding source now, we never really stop looking for opportunities.
Got it.
There's state and federal money for these things. A few years ago, we made a run at acquiring a couple thousand acres that would have become part of Allapattah. The county really didn't have a lot of money to put into it, but we worked with the Water Management District and Florida Forever, and we were tying it into Everglades restoration, and we got pretty close. Ultimately, the negotiation kind of fell through at the end, but we never really stop. We're kind of always, you just don't get a lot of opportunities. So if you have a seller that's willing, even if we don't have the funds, we're going to work on trying to find those funds and move those projects forward. We continue to do land acquisition on a small scale all the time if it's for locating a project, or if it's like we just finished a land acquisition project with Audubon that just kind of came to us. Audubon had an interest in divesting some of its properties that were a challenge for them to manage, largely islands in the river. And they were also looking for some equity to invest in their nature center. And so we worked out a deal. We bought 100 acres of islands, largely. There's a few upland parcels in that mix, but it was mostly islands in the river and estuary that we have sources to manage exotics that they don't, and it's a win-win. So we never really stop, but if there were a dedicated funding source, we could be a lot more intentional.
Does this this may just be my assumption, but does the Martin County Forever plan work with Toby's bill from last year, 1379, where it has that land acquisition funding? Or will this sort of be its own? Are we looking to match with state funds?
Yeah, it certainly would. We would aggressively pursue Florida Forever. We would go after Department of Ag now has a fairly robust funding source for conservation easements. The NRCS, which is part of the USDA, they have some funding sources for land, and anywhere else we can find it. We were working with the Water Management District to help fund one of our last acquisition efforts, because if the land falls, this is kind of one of the neat things about the Indian River Lagoon South element of this, is that any land that gets purchased for that, because it's in the federally authorized Everglades Restoration Program, it counts on the state side of the 50-50 cost share ledger.
Perfect.
And so if we spend, let's say, $20 million buying a 2,000 acre piece for that gets put on the state side of the ledger, and it leverages federal spending on Everglades restoration to the same dollar for dollar.
Perfect.
So not only would we get a lot of match dollars from that. So I'm just spitballing here, but if let's say property X is 2,000 acres and we negotiate a purchase price of $20 million, I would expect that the county might put in something in the order of $2 million, and the state would put in $18 million, and then you'd get $20 million of federal spending on Everglades. It's an incredible investment. So that one, those are pretty exciting. And the Loxalucy, that's most all in the Florida Forever program already. It's defined in the state park's optimum boundary for their management plans. So definitely would have an aggressive element of Florida Forever dollars as well.
So the plan here is to we're going to be doing this for 10 years is the proposal, right? And then how do we prioritize? Is it by what we can get matched? What's the method by figuring out where that money's going to go?
Yeah, that part, there's a lot of factors, right? And so, and the biggest factor you already mentioned is willing sellers, right? So we got to find out who those people are. So there's a lot of legwork to be done. So let's say the voters pass something, whether it's 5, 10, 15.
Department be basically in charge of?
It would land with us. Yeah.
Managing all of this?
Not managing. That's a really important point. The acquisition part, we would probably be the tip of the spear on that, although we would have thorough partnerships with the Water Management District, the state parks. They'd all be highly engaged with us on it, but we would probably be the point on the acquisition part of it. And I believe the way this would probably play out if it gets passed is we would bond maybe 80% of the anticipated receipts from that so that you can get something to work with right up front. If you're waiting for stuff to trickle in, it's really hard to negotiate and prioritize and be intentional about your planning. And you're also, the prices are going up during that whole time. So you get the most bang for your dollar if you make that investment early. So we would probably bond 80% of that, and then we would look at what's out there. We would start approaching landowners. We would be working with NGOs probably to help with that, to identify who's interested in participating in this. Where do they fit into the program? You'd start to kind of put that all on a sheet, do some appraisals, and start to kind of plan pretty holistically about how best to make that investment and how do we get the most. The reality is there's way more opportunity than there will ever be funding.
Fair enough.
I mean, we could spend, if you tried to just go out today and buy all of that we identify, it'd be billions. I mean, there's no way we can do that. So we're in the position where we'd have to take what we have, what can we leverage the most, who's willing to sell, and where do we achieve the most of our objectives. So it's hard to prescribe that. So there'd be a lot of conversation. I believe Martin County Forever's intention is that the ordinance would include an advisory group made up of citizens. So, I think that's probably how the ordinance will end up. And that I see that group being instrumental in helping us to lay out that plan and to help find the willing sellers and to help lobby Florida Forever.
My primary, if I had a concern about this, right, it would be, if I'm not trying to say this about your administrator or anything, just anybody who's running a budget, right? If all of a sudden I've got to balance a budget and there's this money that's coming in, how do you protect that money so that it's not just, I'm trying to think of how to clearly articulate this. If, let's say we'll use parks, for instance, right?
Right.
If we have budgeted $3 million for working, to restore and manage our parks, and now there's this new funding source for managing our parks, how do you guarantee that now we're looking at additional money on top of what we use to manage, so we're truly able to utilize this versus just sort of swapping it out?
Yeah.
Since I don't know the technical term for that in terms of management. But that's a concern that I had is, and not that anybody's trying to do that, but at the end of the day, especially when there's pressure to not increase millage or whatever, if I could just and nobody really fully understands that that's even happening,
Yeah.
there might be incentive there. How do we, is that within the referendum language? Is that something that the commissioners have to put within whatever that ordinance is? How does that work?
It's a great question. I appreciate it, really, Chris. One of my good friends that works in Washington, D.C. often says money's like a fumbled football, right? It's, if you have a lot
around,
of money,
right?
Yeah, and everyone wants it. So, and I've worked in government for I don't want to say. It's been 20 plus years now.
So you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So legitimate question. The short answer is, excuse me. The short answer is it's illegal. The ordinance would prescribe exactly what those funds could be spent on. Under normal circumstances.
In addition to, though, not in replacement of.
Right. In addition to. Yep. So the ordinance would prescribe in detail. Here's what's eligible for those for this funding source, and it's a sales tax referendum that kind of stands alone on a special platform, if you will, for scrutiny.
Yep.
And if dollars were spent from that inappropriately, among other things, the county would be subject to, litigation that would unwind that. And there's also
because we have a current land acquisition fund, right?
Yeah, just a little bit left in it.
Okay.
Probably be gone by the end of the month.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then it's not really a concern.
Yeah, right. And so I know there's a lot of consternation from the last sales tax about, I just put it out there.
Yeah, do you mind going into the history of it?
Yeah, people were concerned about the investment in the water park. The ordinance, when people go to the ballot box, they see the ballot language, which is 75 words. Mm-hmm. There's not many people who go and actually look at the ordinance that created that ballot language. The ordinance and the ballot language pretty clearly laid out that was an eligible expense.
What was the time frame? When did this roughly referendum? Is this 10 years ago or something?
Yeah, something like that.
And so within that language, it included infrastructure, but not necessarily limiting it to what Martin County Forever is proposing, which would be light infrastructure on that land. So it left the opportunity to.
That's not what created the opportunity for the water park. The water park was actually clearly called out in the ordinance. So what you're talking about is another thing that we should be absolutely clear about and up front. Mm-hmm. When you, in the state of Florida, the statute that creates the opportunity for a sales tax referendum requires legally that there's this municipal infrastructure element. It has to be in the ordinance, it has to be in the ballot language, and it has to be affected that way. And so what that does, municipal refers to like City of Stewart, as opposed to the county. So the county collects the receipts from that sales tax, and it has to distribute by statutory requirement a percentage of those receipts to the municipalities based on population. So the City of Stewart would get the largest piece of that. Indiantown would get a piece. Jupiter Island, Sewell's Point, and Ocean Breeze. I think that's all of the municipalities. I want to say if the county collects, I don't know the exact percentages, but I want to say it's something in the ballpark of if the county collected $18 million in a year, that maybe 1.8 of that would go to the City of Stewart, something in that ballpark. And its only restriction is it has to be spent on municipal infrastructure.
I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that it ends up in an account that will be specifically used, because we're not going to be acquiring land probably in the city.
Right.
Maybe there's some opportunity in the Blue Waste, but for building out our parks and our infrastructure and our parks.
Yeah, that's cool. And
like Caney Creek. And
the county can't require that.
But if there is opportunity for, I'm sure as we go along, absolutely to dig in on the Blue Ways or wherever there is.
Yeah. So you'll see that language. If there's a ballot, that's that language, the municipal infrastructure. That's what that means. Mm-hmm. And so the municipalities have some flexibility on how that gets applied, but it does have to be an infrastructure.
So sailfish splash wasn't a bait and switch then? That was understood within because there was some confusion there, at least from some people.
Yeah, I wasn't here when it happened, but I've seen the language. I mean, repeatedly, and it was right there. I don't have any trouble saying that the county perfectly applied that and appropriately applied that. And
But what we're proposing here is not that.
It's not. It won't. There's no talk. Martin County Forever, the county, nobody's talking about having some water park or other kind of park infrastructure element. Everyone is saying the same thing in the conversations that I'm hearing, and the ordinance language that I've seen is that it's confined to these 4 program areas, these lands, and nothing more. And if there's been consternation, it's been how do they write that in a way that convinces people that that's exactly what it is.
And so how does it make its way through the commission to where it ultimately ends up
Right.
that way on the ordinance?
Right. Yeah, that's where the consternation is. How do we make this watertight? Pardon the pun.
That was really the only liability I've heard where anybody was concerned. I think there's a lot of support for acquiring land. That was
Right.
sort of the only hiccup is,
Sure.
so if that was taken care of,
Yeah.
I feel like there should be a lot of support for it if people are aware.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, anecdotally, I'm not a survey professional, but anecdotally, I hear that just like everybody else
Right.
does. That people who moved to Martin County moved here because they like the character.
It's rural.
It's rural, and
Right.
it's not so intense, and there's natural lands, and people that live here have a wildlife ethic, and
I said it last night too in my comments is, what makes Central Park, the real estate around it, really valuable is the park.
yeah,
So I see if we're a little more, long-term thinking over the next 50 years, right?
mm-hmm.
When all of your neighboring municipalities are sort of mindlessly sprawling concrete, no offense,
Yeah.
but if you'll hold the line and try to stay more rural, you're going to be exponentially more valuable,
Absolutely,
across the board
yeah.
because you're so unique. I mean, we already have that heritage, but especially with how much pressure there's going to be to develop over the next 10, 20, 30.
Yeah, it'll only get more intense, right?
Right.
I like your reference to Central Park. I coined a phrase a few years ago after I had a chance encounter with a big developer in Broward County down in Hollywood, and he said, he flies over Martin County, and he's like, man, there's all that green space.
Right.
We got to build on that.
No.
He's like, how could there be so much green space
Right.
right next to the coast and in the tropics, right? And to someone who's in that industry, it's very attractive. And I've heard people say they feel the same way flying over Central Park, like, holy cow, there's incredible investment potential there. Well, the reason is because it's been preserved, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm a private landowner, I have development rights, right? I've made that investment, and I have I want to exercise whatever legal opportunities I have. But if the public owns it, that's off the table, right? And it's forever Central Park of the Lower East Coast.
To that point, I'm trying to basically override objections with you.
Sure, I appreciate it.
If there are any. Right. So one of the thoughts was, okay, we're taking it off the tax rolls. How productive is this land currently? How much opportunity for really development, like you said, is there? Is this going to cost beyond, the half-cent sales tax residents?
Right.
Copious amounts of money.
Yep. It's a really good point, and it's one that for my entire career in natural resources, it's something that comes up. I mean, I've often said the most effective thing I ever do is acquire land for conservation, because it's the only permanent thing that I ever do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the common objections is what's that do the sales tax rules. Well, there is an impact, and it's difficult to quantify because it's hard to say, what you end up acquiring, right? If you buy an acre of beachfront property, that has a different property tax impact than if you buy an acre of wetland, i.e.
Out
Palomar.
west.
Mm-hmm. So it's hard to say this is the dollar amount. I will say there's some mitigating factors. For instance, the property tax that we pay on large portion that is paid on large portions of the land identified in these 4 program areas, it's a pretty low rate. I think Palmar is probably in the ballpark of like $20 a year per acre. It's pretty minimal.
Mm-hmm.
The lands that we would be acquiring tend to be harder to build on. That's why they're not already built. That's why it's probably related to the fact that they have some wildlife value. They've got water on the land.
And we've classified a lot of this as wetland currently, so you can't build on it.
There's a lot of wetland in it, so
Right.
it's more challenging to develop those lands, and so they inherently have less taxable value. Yeah, and of course, agricultural lands, that, are taxed at lower rates. So there is that property tax. It's a real thing. There would be a measurable reduced property tax from conservation land acquisition, but I think I'm just anecdotally, I think my observations are that the value that creates is easily outweighing the loss in that property tax. As you said, the properties around Central Park have inherent value because they're adjacent to places people want to be or want to look at, and I think that more than makes up for the loss of property tax in those acquisitions.
I was just looking at the website here trying to find. I know there was somewhere where it talked about the offset in cost and new jobs related to like recreation and parks.
Yeah, you can use other examples in the past where it's been done, but it's hard to project forward because, like I said,
what land is it that you even end up buying?
Exactly, and there's so much difference.
I think a good point too is we're talking about a sales tax, right? So sales tax isn't necessarily even directly coming out of the pockets of anybody here.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Not entirely. It's an opportunity to get other people.
It's about 40% non-residents that pay that sales tax
from
as
Miami
they travel through and
to
visit.
help us conserve land.
Yeah, yeah.
Which I thought was a great point. I think you have on here about 40%, 37. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about 40% in Martin County, and so I think that's an important point.
Right.
So it's
not applying to groceries.
Yeah.
It's not applying to prescription meds or school supplies.
The exemptions for a referendum sales tax are more lengthy than the exemptions for normal sales tax.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some things included in that are exempt from that sales tax that aren't for your regular state sales tax. The other thing it does, I think, in a referendum, it's limited to $5,000 for any purchase. So if you go buy a new boat for $50,000, you're only paying that half-cent additional sales tax on the first $5,000. But so speaking about return on investment, that you have an instantaneous built-in 40% return because of the sales tax that's paid by out of county visitors. And
with Brightline potentially coming in, right? You may have a lot more human beings.
Yeah.
We're bumping up our ecotourism. That's a big push with the TDC. We're trying to get tourism, heads and beds and more humans. That's all going to help.
The ecotourism thing is so exciting.
Narissa's rad. She's awesome.
Yeah, it's such a great idea. And the two folks that we've hired to do that couldn't be better. They're so engaging and dynamic and energetic, and they just love what they're doing, and they're doing an incredible job. We've gotten so much good feedback.
It's easy to sell it and manage it and grow it when it's who you are and what you believe in, and that they do embody, parks and tourism, and
they do.
Yep.
They do. I mean, for your listeners, I'll put in a plug. If you haven't, go to Explore Natural Martin. Check out the upcoming hikes and make sure you sign up for one because you will not regret it. They're incredible experiences. I've been on a couple and I've learned things about the ecosystem I live in that I didn't know, and it just I appreciate it even more having had those experiences.
A lot of us, we've lived here forever and we don't necessarily even go to the beach or go to our parks and really explore them.
That's been my experience. If I give a little personal testimony, when we first moved here from Key West, my office was in Hobe Sound with state parks, but I was the bureau chief for Southeast Florida, and so I was working everywhere else but here. I just happened to live here, and I'd only been in Florida for about a year. I couldn't have spelled Martin County for you, but I lived there. Mm-hmm. And all I did is I woke up and I drove other places to work on the resource and the parks and interpretation and experiences for people. And it really wasn't until I came to work for Martin County that I started to grasp what a special place that we were living in. And so I'd lived here for 4 years and didn't understand. I mean, I knew we had beaches. I knew there was 4 state parks, and I knew those parks, but I was actually working in the industry and didn't fully appreciate the incredible nature of what's available to us in the environment in Martin County, the specialness of the Indian River Lagoon and the St. Lucie Estuary, all the western lands that are open to the public. This place is amazing.
How did you end up in Martin County? What's your story?
It wasn't by design necessarily. So I'd worked in state parks for about 20 years in Iowa, and I kind of did every job I wanted to do, and I was really in my dream job as the district manager for Northeast Iowa, which I could go on and on about Iowa. Your listeners won't care. But if you go to Iowa, go to Northeast Iowa.
Cold.
It is that, particularly in January.
Yeah.
Which is part of my story. I had met a gentleman at a conference, and he said, "Hey, you ever think about coming to Florida?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't really know a lot about Florida, but we're kind of Iowa people, and generation after generation of Iowa people, farms, the whole thing. We got a farm in Northeast Iowa in the Maehl family that's 150 years in our family, right?
Don't ever sell the farm.
No, right. So it wasn't on my radar, but this gentleman started planting some seeds and talking about Florida's park system, and it was a particularly cold winter in 2013. I remember I was at our central office in Des Moines, Iowa, for a meeting. I'd come the night before. I woke up in my hotel and went out to start my car, because you need to start the car before you try to drive it.
Yeah.
So I started up, and I just remember seeing on the dashboard it was 7 below zero.
No.
-7.
Nope.
And the car, just whines. It's like, it doesn't want to start. It starts up. I go in, I'm grabbing breakfast. I'm just about ready to leave the hotel, and my phone rings. And this gentleman says, "Hey, how would you like to move to Key West?"
Good timing, man.
Like, well played, sir.
Yes.
So we kind of engaged in the conversation. I'm like, "Look, this is crazy. I shouldn't even be talking to you about this, but I'll talk to my wife, and we'll entertain it. Maybe we'll make my anniversary was coming up, and I said, maybe we'll make a trip out of coming down to check it out." And so we did. She was on board with taking a trip to the Keys in February. So we ran down and saw the park and met the people, and we're like, wow, we actually kind of need to think about this. Like, this is maybe a real thing.
After meeting the people, you're like,
yeah, really. I mean,
the Keys is interesting.
We loved it. The Keys is awesome. Yeah. What's weird is people, when we told them we were ultimately made the decision to move to Key West, I was the park manager at Fort Zachary Taylor in Key West, Florida. Like,
that's
you can't
awesome.
Make this stuff up. We lived in a house on the beach on 55 acres that was all ours at the end of the day. Like, the gate goes shut. Kids were playing hide and seek in a Civil War fort. We were sitting on a beach that kind of, I always said, is like where the Gulf and the Atlantic came together in the West End. You can't find better sunsets.
No,
it was epic. But when we told people we moved from rural Iowa to Key West, they're like, wow, that's like, that must be like the most dramatic change possible culturally. And actually, no. Like, when you live in Key West and you have kids there, you kind of get integrated into that local community. Yep. There's 2 communities. There's the tourist community. There's the local community.
Yes.
And it had more in common with Iowa than a lot of places we've been. It was like a very folksy, neighborly, kind of tight knit group, really.
Mm-hmm.
And we loved it. It was remarkable. But
How long were you in the Keys?
not long enough, and my kids would say that with an exclamation point. We were there for about 14 months, and the bureau chief for that district at the time, he saw. This is my version of the story. He might tell a different version. He saw how much fun I was having being a park manager again. And so, I'd come from being a district manager in Iowa to being a park manager again. And man, there's nothing better than being in the park, right? And interacting with people every day. And, they're all there because they saved up all year to go visit this place and have this experience. Happy. They're at their happiest, yep. Right? And you have something profound to offer them. One of my favorite things to do when I'd get my office work done, I had park rangers that were way better at this than I was. They didn't let me do it often, but if I had a few minutes, I'd walk over to the fort or down to the beach.
What's the name of this place again? I'll pull it up.
Fort Zachary Taylor. It's just crazy. I mean, I could go on and on about it, but I'd go over there and I'd find a family that's kind of wandering around the fort, and I'd just walk up, introduce myself, and I'm in my park ranger outfit with my fancy campaign hat.
I could see it.
And I'd say, "You guys have any questions?" And their answer was always, "No, we're good. We're just checking it out," because people don't want to impose, right? I learned that was just the default answer. Maybe they didn't have questions because they didn't know what to ask, and so I'd just pick out something near them and say, "Hey, did you know?" Tell them something about this Columbia cannon and what it was, and then you'd have them for an hour, and after that hour, their experience in that park was so dramatically enhanced.
That's beautiful, man.
It was so much fun. So I'd been there about 14 months, and the bureau chief
wanted to live in the house.
He had his eyes on another house. So John Pennekamp, which everyone knows, it's the largest underwater state park in the country. It's one of a kind. It opens up, and he's like, John's having too much fun being a park manager.
Yeah.
And so he demotes and takes that park manager spot.
Yeah, of course.
And our state park director at the time. So District 5, Southeast Florida, it's intense. We don't have an off season. We have a lot of urban interface. You got parks in downtown Miami, and in the 10 parks in the Keys. It's a handful, and not a lot of other bureau chiefs are interested in moving into that district because of how challenging it is. And so the state park director calls me up. He's like, "Hey, I need somebody that's got some experience in this. Are you interested?" I'm like, "What are you talking about? I just got here."
Yeah. No.
But long story short, we ended up moving back up here to the district. The district office is in Martin County. And so, we're like, "Where's Martin County?" We came up, ironically, what the first thing we did, we checked into our hotel to come check it out. And the next morning we took the kids to Sailfish Splash.
That's perfect.
To the water.
Yes.
That was our first experience in Martin County.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
And you were sold.
Yep.
And so you've now been working for the county for
5.5, coming up on 6 years. In 2017, I love telling this story because life kind of it's full of providential experiences, right? So much of it I don't plan. If I did, I'd probably screw it up.
Exactly.
So 2017, Irma hit the Florida Keys pretty bad, and we had hundreds of employees displaced from their houses. The parks were devastated, and the money starts rolling in from the state and FEMA, and there was a lot of work to be done. And I had some assistant bureau chief at the time, wonderful person who was going through some family challenges and was a little bit out of commission. So I kind of had to take on that role of overseeing that whole process of recovery down there. So basically, I was living in the Keys. Kids were in middle school.
That's wild how that worked out, that you happened to be there to
Yeah.
help guide that, rebuild that process.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Right.
And it pretty devastating. I mean, I still see in my mind's eye some of that devastation that I'll never forget.
Within that 14-month window.
No, this was after I'd moved up. So in 14, I moved up to the bureau chief position. So I was overseeing the district at that time.
And then they called you back down.
And then in 17, when I, as acting in my role as the bureau chief, I was facilitating the recovery down there, and it's hundreds of millions of dollars being pumped into that recovery effort. A lot of interest in getting things back open as quickly as possible, and getting people in their homes, right? Because your staff, you live there, and a lot of them live in park housing of some sort or another, and they're just, their whole lives were upended.
What was the day-to-day like?
It was intense.
Were you down there?
Yeah.
You were physically down there, right?
Yeah, I'd leave Sunday night, and we were in, I think we went in, and I'll never forget this, we went in a caravan, maybe, I think it was 2 weeks after the storm. I mean, there was still no power, no cell phone. I mean, I can tell crazy stories about, like, one of my favorites was the manager at Fort Zachary Taylor, who had replaced me, who's still there, by the way, because he's smarter than I am.
Lucky dog.
He was at the district office. His family had come up to evacuate. They had to evacuate. And he was sitting at the district office. We just gotten an aerial photograph from NOAA that was shot like that morning to kind of start assessing damage, because that's what you do. You figure out what's still there, what's gone. So in the meantime, we were also trying to locate everybody, because not everybody made it out. And so the protocol was you check in after the storm, so we know everyone's okay. Well, there was two people, two rangers from Fort Zachary Taylor that hadn't checked in. Their families didn't know where they were. No one had spoke to them. And we didn't know at that time, who was most impacted. It turns out, like, kind of the Bay of Honda area was the epicenter. Key West did pretty well, but they were cut off. There was zero communication. You couldn't get to them. And so we just didn't know. And so we were worried sick about these two park rangers. There's all these efforts to try and find them. We've been communicating with the National Guard and FWC, and, if you see these people, here's who we're looking for. And so I'm sitting at the desk in Hope Sound with, looking at this aerial photograph with the park manager. And he goes, "Why is the tractor out here?" Like, they have this big loader tractor. He's like, "I put that thing in, they stuffed it away in a safe spot, and it was clear on the other side of the park." And he's like, "How in the world did that happen?" And, at first we were almost panicked. And then he's like, "Wait, there's a burn pile there. That pile wasn't there before."
Yeah, Rick's got the tractor out.
Those two rangers were cleaning up the park already.
Good man.
So that's how we knew they were probably okay. So yeah, we went in, it was a couple of weeks later, the FWC helped us secure access, because you couldn't get in. They weren't, it wasn't safe. The roads weren't open. You couldn't find the roads, honestly, most of it. And we gathered up all the folks who lived there, and we met in Florida City. They brought down, a few things to start the cleanup process, generators, water. And we led a caravan into the Keys with all the staff that had housing. And so that was, I'll never forget it. It was pretty wild. We actually kind of prayed with them all just before we went into the Keys. And I have a picture still of.
I bet it gets real.
Oh yeah.
When the power's off and everything's not. Yeah.
Well,
there's a lot of praying.
I went up to, we pulled in, one of the places that I just remember clearly is pulling into the north end of Bay of Honda State Park, where the park manager had a house, and we had a smaller park ranger house, and pulled in with this gal, and the house gone. There's like no evidence that there was ever a house there. Man. So her whole life is just gone. And so, what do you do? Right. And, so that was, it was pretty intense. And for really the better part of, 3 or 4 months, I was working out of the Keys, facilitating that recovery effort. And, kids are in middle school, and at some point it was, I'm making a long story out of this, but at some point my family's just like, this isn't working for us. Like, we kind of want Dad around, and I was, missing ball games and choir concerts and all that stuff, and stuff that just was important to me and them. And so I remember it was a Sunday night. I was, we had a long conversation, and I had decided to, on Monday, I was going to call my boss and say, "Hey, is there another way we can do this? Like, I need like a reprieve." And I was not looking forward to the call, because he wasn't a guy I like to disappoint. He's a bit of a legend in state parks. And I loved what I was doing, believed in it. It was too much. And so I was going to try to figure out a way to back off on some of that. And I got a call that morning from someone that said, "Hey, the ecosystem division person for Martin County just took a job. I think you'd be perfect for it."
Wow.
And I'm like, "What's that?" I didn't even know it was a thing. And
I'm glad we got you.
well,
I mean, if I was you, I would have probably said, "Hey, listen, I really missed that house in the park. I'd love to help."
Right.
But I'm glad we got you.
So yeah, I didn't even know what I was walking into, and that was spring of 2018. About 3 weeks after I started, we had algae in the water.
Wow.
And hey,
you came right into it.
Figure it out.
So you've been involved in the entire process then with LOSUM and all. What's been your experience with that process?
When I think back on, I mean, we're still in the LOSUM process.
Right. It's not over.
We're hopeful to get a record of decision and get this thing going. It's time. NIMS threw us a curveball there in the end, but
they seem to feel like it's all ironed out, though. It's just going to take a little time.
Yeah, the core is. We can get into the weeds on the course. Rejecting the NIMS biological opinion, they're asking them to either withdraw it or revise it, and the county supports the Corps' interpretation of that, and we think there's some good things in the NIMS biological opinion, but there's some things that are just myopic. They're just too focused on a single, somewhat unproven connection that is at the expense of so many other things. And so, we appreciate the Corps looking at this holistically and trying to
and also you've had years, to bring it up.
Years.
Why now?
And all the rest of us have been working on it, right? And committing our time. And so that's a little frustrating. We appreciate that the Corps is committing to the process that they'd laid out, and I think they're taking a transparent and open approach to it. We needed to see them, get this across the finish line. I will say we're extremely grateful that the Corps, when I say Corps, I mean U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, has implemented what we learned in the LOSUM process to use the flexibility that LORS provides to spare us what would have been another lost summer, almost certainly.
I've been calling it LOSUM Light.
LOSUM Light. That's why I might coin that.
Yeah.
I'll take that from you.
The Major Bell said the LORS with the spirit of LOSUM.
LORS with the spirit of LOSUM.
Yeah.
That's another good way of saying it. So when I think back on LOSUM, I think the first thing that comes to mind, I have a really optimistic and kind of renewed energy from how well we did LOSUM. And then when I say we, this is the best part. It wasn't just Martin County. It was Martin County. It was the city of Stewart. It was NGOs. It was local stakeholders. The St. Lucie River and Estuary group represented themselves so well in this process. We had a clear message. We were all on point. We coordinated well, and it made a profound impact on the process. Everyone, through the elected officials right down to staff. When we joined those calls, we were prepared, and we had a clear, effective, and cohesive message that I think a lot of the other stakeholders envied. I think that was the biggest part of why we were so successful with LOSUM. And I think it's a great model for any effort that's in the interest of our area. When we all work together, we can get so much more done. It was incredibly satisfying just to have the organization and the cohesion of that entire group, and everybody contributed something. Martin County was blessed to have the support of our board to go out and recruit a great team. We had an incredible bench of experts who basically told us, go get who you need. And that, we formed a really powerful team of people that augmented what we didn't have the expertise in, people who had experience in NEPA, people who had experience in the LORS creation process. We had engineers and scientists and lawyers, and our internal team was just completely committed to it. But even with the robust bench that we had, there'd be just kind of like lay people in the community that would come up with ideas or flesh out our ideas, and that would contribute incredibly to the process. So that was super satisfying. When we started LOSUM, I remember it wasn't even called LOSUM at the time. It was in 2018 still. The Corps had put it in the work plan. Congressman Brian Mast had included it in the Word 18 that would require them to do a new lake schedule. And I remember I was at a conference over in, I think it was in Fort Myers, and I got the email, and like it was the kind of first time I realized, hey, we're actually going to have a schedule rewrite for this. And Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer Reynolds was at the conference. I met her in the hallway a few minutes later, and I'm like, hey, do you know this? She's like, yeah, we'd heard that this was coming up. And I'm like, well, let's talk about it. Like, what should be our goal? What do you expect we can accomplish with this? Like, how much can we move the ball with a new schedule? And she said, she goes, realistically, I think you guys should expect to maybe, if you do a good job, get a 15% reduction in discharges. Mm-hmm. We ended up with probably more than 50.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
So things went, and I think that's, like I said, I attribute that mostly to just uniform support for this, and the organization of having all the stakeholders working together. I mean, I don't know how many times I had, we work with all the people around South Florida, all the other stakeholders. We're always at the same meetings. We break bread together. Mm-hmm. We know those folks are friends. And in a large sense, we're all working for the same goal. But there's times in that LOSUM process where we had to represent the St. Lucie River, and other stakeholders are pulling on the same end of a single string, right? Mm-hmm. You can't stretch it. It's going to go one way or the other. And there were so many times where we had offline conversations that were like, how did you guys do that? Like, if only we had that kind of cohesion, and they'd have conflicting interests within their own groups that just made it hard for the Corps to get behind, because they didn't know which part of it to get behind. With us, it was simple, and we were able to find enough symbiotics with some of the other stakeholders in this that made it easy for the Corps to give us a plan that really worked well.
It does seem like the nature of this discharge location, you have the city and the county. It's kind of a pinpoint focal.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you have a pretty small but mighty group of people who are consistently involved, always there, always, speaking to it. And I don't know how many other stakeholders or on the West Coast has that same consistency of like a Rivers Coalition meeting where you have all these people sitting in that room every month.
Yeah.
You're going to be there at that meeting. You're going to have to talk about where we're at. There's
and you have people that know it so well.
Mm-hmm.
There's people that have some profound expertise and communication skills. And then I think that the other thing that makes it so special here is you have that group, but then like the electeds, like yourself, the city commission, the county commission, our congressmen add all this horsepower to that. They take that and then amplify it and add power to it in that communication. I mean, when you put all that together, it seems
even
unstoppable.
Politically, it seems like, God has been putting it all together almost to have a Brian Mast and a DeSantis and all of this happening.
Yeah.
To go from that Rick Scott era,
yeah,
to the current, even though there's some disappointments in Jackie not being on the board, but at the same time, there still is this seemingly unified.
You bet.
It's very
the stars aligned.
Right. It's very, very curious. It hasn't.
Yeah, I would put Drew Bartlett in that mix too, the executive director for South Florida Water Management District. His role in this is not small, and he understands our issues and values the restoration, and so that's been a big part of it too.
What do you see as the county's, I know this is highly speculative, but LOSUM will continue to evolve.
Mm-hmm.
What is the county looking at, and being as diplomatic as
Yeah.
possible, right? Like
Right.
making sure that it is still serving our best interest
Yeah.
locally.
It's a great question, and we've a year ago started to transition into that conversation. As we had a tentatively selected plan, and it seemed like our input opportunities kind of waned as this became a procedural NEPA closure kind of activity in the last year or so. We started saying, well, particularly with like the biological opinion, what are aspects of that may not improve LOSUM, but set us up for the next schedule? Because LOSUM will now be the baseline.
What's the time frame that this first wave of LOSUM exists? Is there a timetable on it, a clock?
Yeah, so there's like two phases to it. The second phase really starts when the C43 reservoir, which is the Caloosahatchee reservoir, is complete. That kickstarts like kind of phase 2 as it's going. Like that's going to be a pretty short window. C43 is moving very aggressively, and LOSUM is not. And so those two dates are
going to line up together.
They're going to come pretty close, and it doesn't change it a lot. When the EAA reservoir is complete, that would trigger a schedule update. I don't think it'll be a schedule rewrite. It'll be a much smaller process than what the LOSUM NEPA process was, because we were really starting with no baseline. Loers was intended to relieve the risk to the Herbert Hoover Dike. It wasn't intended to be a balanced schedule. It had really one prescribed purpose.
Right.
Save the dike.
Yeah.
And save the communities around it.
Don't kill anybody on the lake.
It was a really blunt instrument. Drop the lake as low as possible, and so in order to create a balanced plan, the LOSUM NEPA process had to be pretty robust. We were basically starting from scratch. Legally, I think LORS was the baseline for measuring performance for NEPA. How does this affect everything when we make these changes? You have to have a baseline, but we needed a pretty robust stakeholder involved thing to create something that's balanced, because balance wasn't the objective before. It's one of the reasons why, when you look at LOSUM, one of the areas where it doesn't perform as well is on lake ecology. And that's been talked about a lot. It's a legitimate thing. We have an interest in Lake Okeechobee. Part of it's in Martin County. We have an interest in it being in good, healthy condition because, we use it. It's near to us. There's going to be times when that water comes to us.
And you want it to be as healthy as possible.
We want it to be as healthy as possible, of course. LOSUM
especially in that southeast corner.
LOSUM doesn't help it because it runs the lake up higher, which threatens those littoral zones. The vegetation that helps the lake is at risk with higher lake levels that LOSUM creates.
Unless and until what, the EAA reservoir?
That will help. Reservoir storage north of the lake will help. Stormwater rule that changes the way new development treats stormwater. That will help. Attenuates flows. All those things will help. I think at some point the state is going to have to look at some kind of in-lake restoration activity. All that stuff fixes the basin, but it doesn't fix the damage that's already been done. I use the illustration of like if you have a leaking roof, you might realize it when the ceiling gets discolored. Mm-hmm. You could go patch the roof, but you really haven't finished the problem until you've replaced the ceiling. So with Lake Okeechobee, they're working on some things to fix the watershed. That fixes the roof, but you still got that stained ceiling that's got to be fixed. So, those are some challenging conversations. It's almost like a SERP 2.0. It's big lake, so the solutions are big. There's some kind of exciting things being talked about, but coming back to the LOSUM conversation, it doesn't do well for the lake. Well, you can't. A couple of points I like to make, I think, because it helps contextualize this. When you have a schedule like LORS that's only interest is lowering the lake to prevent dike failure risk, any schedule you create from that is going to elevate waters. Because the only intention of that was to keep the lake low. Mm-hmm. So any other schedule is going to keep the lake higher.
Right.
So it's impossible to create a schedule that helps lake ecology when the schedule you had was probably the very best schedule for lake ecology. And on top of that, it segues into point 2. If you had a schedule, and I think you could argue that Lower's 08 was a schedule that was most beneficial to lake ecology, and during that time you went from 45,000 acre feet of submerged aquatic vegetation to nearly 0, obviously a schedule can't fix the lake. So we had the best schedule you could pretty much have for lake ecology, and during the time we had that schedule, the lake degraded substantially. Well, the answer to that question is weather. Tropical systems.
That sloshing back and forth with the water.
Yeah. So at a recent conference, we were talking about this, and somebody said, well, Lourdes didn't have a fair shot because there was hurricanes. And I said, well, when are you not going to have hurricanes?
You have to assume that.
So I've been increasingly vocal that you cannot fix lake ecology with a schedule. You've got to fix it with watershed work and in-lake work. You've got to actually fix the problem. And then you can have a schedule.
Impossible, right? I mean, that's such a large.
It's big, but the state's doing big things now. You know, we're doing things we never thought possible. If you had said in 2000, when we passed SERP, which is Comprehensive Everglades Restoration, if you had told Florida that in 2023 you'd have one project finished, we'd been like, oh, why are we even doing this? Like, no one would have had the fortitude to see that through. Aren't we glad we did? Because now in the next few years, we're going to see, I mean, we have so many projects underway and so much progress is being made. And we really can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. The funding that we have now, it's momentum that we've never even seen close to. And there just seems to be no appetite to stop. It takes that kind of like guts almost to take on something like a Lake Okeechobee restoration. And it's easy to be pragmatic about, but if you don't start it, you don't create the opportunity for some future generation to actually realize it.
Along the thought process of you cannot restore ecology in the lake with a schedule, then lake restoration mode. Are you familiar?
Yeah.
Can you talk about lake restoration mode? Because there's not many people that, from a technical standpoint,
lake restoration mode, what it was is something that was kind of added at the end to help address the issue of LOSUM driving up the lake too much and it having this negative impact on ecology.
But if the ecology is already terrible,
so
what are you restoring?
If you can get the lake low enough for long enough, you can recover. We've seen that happen. In 2019, we had a really dry season and we had a remarkable rebound of submerged aquatic vegetation. So if there's an opportunity, if Mother Nature allows it, and there's a way to, in between hurricanes, and you can meet beneficial flows like, the Everglades needs water, the Caloosahatchee needs water in the dry season. If you can get them the water they need to get the lake lower for, an extended period of time, you can get some recovery. So the recovery mode gives the Corps the flexibility to exercise that when they have the opportunity. It's challenging. I mean, Mother Nature has a 6-foot lever and the Corps has a 1-inch lever.
Exactly.
Right. We're
living in a swamp.
You can apply pressure, right? But you can't just turn the dial and make it what you want it to be.
Do you know the technical parameters for, is it lake recovery mode or lake restoration mode? I don't know.
Lake recovery mode. And it's not one prescribed metric. Okay. So there's different factors.
I heard if you don't hit targets in a certain time frame, you're locked into releases over.
You're not locked into it. It's an option. That's one of the neat things about LOSUM, and one of the things that gives people concern is that a lot of it is geared towards providing water managers flexibility so that they can make decisions in real time and not be prescribed a decision that doesn't make sense. For instance, if you implemented LORS by prescription, so in the LORS guidance, you follow these charts that say, well, we're at this lake level and here's the tributary conditions and here's the climate outlook. You can release, let's say, 1,800. The language says up to 1,800. That's where the discretion lives. If it just said 1,800, then the Corps would just have to open the gate. and send it to us, and it might create conditions later where you have a drought. You could have used that water. They don't have to give up in the first quarter. It allows them to kind of see things play out and make decisions using that discretion. What LOSUM does is it really adds a lot more of that discretion where they can look holistically at things like El Niños and La Niñas and so what can we really anticipate? Or let's not look at the whole period of record. Look at the record where we had these kinds of circumstances, and they can make better judgments. We believe in that. We think that's at least I, speaking for myself and my team at Martin County, that flexibility is going to provide better outcomes than just following a prescription like lures. Like I said, if that were prescribed, we would, all last summer, we would have been blasted out. We would have just completely killed the estuary.
It's definitely better than what it was.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Already.
Yeah. The irony is
we're moving in a good direction.
Success is quiet, right?
True.
How many people really understand that we dodged a bullet last year? I don't think many people do, unless they're the ones that are really engaged and paying attention. They don't know it because it didn't happen. Like what doesn't happen, we don't pay attention to, but it was a huge win. I mean, just profound. I mean, we would add it to the list of 13, 16, 18, 20, 23 would be a hand-wringing, oh, remember that year, it just sucked.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to celebrate things that didn't happen, but that's one we definitely need to. And I think another, to that point, I'm just rambling now, but
you're not. This is all very informative, man.
When we were in Washington last month for the task force, and then we go make a bunch of meetings with agencies and the Florida delegation and try to promote our causes, particularly as it relates to water quality. One of our takeaways, and we kind of do our after action briefing on that, like what went well, what things do we need to include next time, what did we hear from them? One of the takeaways that I had was that we need to get more vocal about celebrating the completion of our CERT projects. We've got C44 that's, it's in the testing phase still, but it's largely functional for us. The STA has been functioning for years. They're building the C2324 STA. It's aggressively being built. The North Reservoir in the C2324 is funded and ready to start construction. The South Reservoir, the state just took that over, and they plan to move that out faster. We've got the Loxahatchee River CERT project moving aggressively. Like they're getting ready to start that project, and it's largely funded. We have incredible things to celebrate. I think it would be a mistake for us to go quiet in that. I think being kind of out front on Everglades restoration, being the first recipients of major restoration efforts, I think it would be wise for us to be vocal about those successes. One of the things we kind of heard, these are my words, not anybody else's words, but this is kind of a summary of what I heard is, hey, is it really working? Should we keep doing this Everglades restoration thing? And we're like,
we're just getting started.
Like, oh yeah, it's definitely working. And there was the hiccup with the seepage issue on the C44 that became a much bigger issue than it was, largely because we weren't out in front talking about it. I think we weren't explaining to people this is what it is, and left to people's imaginations. A leaking dam sounds awful.
But you also have a deep-rooted pessimism.
Fair.
In Martin County.
Fair.
With forever years of discharges, 100 years of discharges. So
yeah, it's fair.
But I agree with you.
And people that you have gave their lives to working on this for decades with not seeing success. So I empathize with there's people that we are truly standing on the shoulders of that had very frustrating decades of efforts and didn't get to see the results. And I have the unique pleasure of coming into it right when things started to get going. And so my entire
You're not jaded. It's perfect.
I have such a Pollyanna perspective on it.
It's good.
It seems like it's all
don't change.
We're just going crazy.
Don't change. Hopefully LOSUM goes great and you won't become bitter.
I hope so too. You mentioned earlier, I want to circle back to this. As we start implementing, these are my words again. I don't know if this is what you meant to say. What are we doing moving forward with LOSUM.
Mhm.
That's part and parcel to the county's interest in ramping up our seagrass restoration efforts and ramping up coral restoration. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, like continuing to build in that value, right? And so in LOSUM,
More assets to leverage.
those two assets were completely unaccounted for. We brought it up in scoping back in like spring of 2019 that, hey, these are influenced by discharges. They need to be accounted for. We need to have environmental impacts addressed for coral and seagrasses. And the answer was
But it seems like we only ever care about if it has economic benefit, right? Isn't that
doesn't hurt to have that.
So
Yeah.
like conservation for, environmentalism versus conservation. We're in a red state.
Yeah.
Nobody really, not nobody, but largely the plight of the gopher tortoise or the lobster is far lower on the totem pole than maybe a blue state, but conservation for the purpose of use, to be able to leverage, like, we said, diving on coral, or this is a park now, this is a diving park, or this is a thing that is part of ecotourism that you could be damaging by discharging.
Yeah, I think you definitely see that play out in the public arena. In the NEPA process, the statutory NEPA process, it's a little bit more objective, and so we see opportunities where if we can get coral included as an impacted area from lake, that's another metric that, I don't know if you remember that pie chart thing that had all the squiggly lines showing performance of different stakeholders. They had stakeholders around the outside, and then their performance from 0 to 1. There's a mathematical prescriptive way to tilt the schedule in favor of less discharges by adding additional performance measures. So by including coral and seagrass, that's two more factors that help mathematically, so to speak, influence that schedule to protect the estuary. And we think that the next time around, because of some of the language, particularly that NIMS, one of the things we appreciate about the NIMS biological opinion is they called out, like, it needs to include coral. It's clearly impacted. And so we think in the next round, we'll be able to change the area of impact and include that as an additional performance measure.
I've noticed that too with the core and sugar case, is even in those conversation, the opinion from the judge. It's like they don't realize fully what they're maybe implicating for the St. Lucie River by what they're saying. So the conversations around environmental impact studies around the STAs, how is that water affecting, that pollution affecting those STAs? That is a great point.
Right.
Now let's apply that to the St. Lucie. Or, so with each one of these rounds, it's true. More information comes out, more consideration.
Yeah.
And to me, it makes it so much more obvious that we've been completely overlooking all of those same considerations, here, and treating it more like just a discharge pipe, versus an ecosystem.
Right, I hear you.
So
I'm so empathetic to any judge that has to rule on these things. Can you imagine trying to wrap your head around these issues? And
it's trying to deal with an outdated system. Something that originally there weren't many people here. There wasn't as much value necessarily in terms of, property values or human health.
Sure. And
it was easier just to manage that state water, sending it, we are the discharge outlet for the entire Florida water management system.
Yeah.
But now it's different. There's more scale to this economy. There's more happening here, that the ecosystem is increasingly picked apart and understood and valued, and it does seem like environmental law at the same time is catching up.
Sure.
There's a lot happening.
Those are good points.
All point to, hey, that St. Lucie River is really valuable.
I know that I've seen articles back in the 40s, shortly after they started, managing water through the St. Lucie Canal, where they recognized this is bad. Like, how do we stop this?
Yes.
But I don't think until recently we were in a place as a society where we were willing to invest what it required to fix those things. So it's one thing to say, this is awful, we got to do something different. If I I don't know, if I'm your plumber or whatever, I come to your house and I'm like, you've got a problem here that really probably it could make your whole house a casualty. Like, it's hard for you to know where to start, right? And in 1950, you couldn't dream of building an EAA reservoir. Like, you couldn't wrap your head around
even
it.
today. It seems impossible.
Yeah,
I know that they're going to do it.
Yeah, we're willing to try.
High walls and how big? What's a footprint?
I think it's 10,000 acres.
That seems impossible.
Isn't it nuts? Isn't it nuts? But yeah, we're willing to do crazy stuff like that. And for decades, people, like a couple of our commissioners, senators, congressmen, we had people like, yeah, we need to do this. Like, we know it's expensive, we know it's arduous, and we know it's new, but
it's not going to get any cheaper to build. It's
Yeah,
not going to ever be any
right.
less expensive to build at all.
Yep.
Well, we are at an hour and 40 minutes.
See, you're right.
Yeah, it goes quick, right?
It does.
What do you think would be important, to kind of finish up with for the average person, along the lines of what you're doing with the county, what you'd like them to know, how you'd like them to get involved?
And if I could communicate one thing to your listeners, it's you live in a special place. Like, if you don't know it, ask someone who just moved here. They probably moved here because it's so special.
Yeah, ask them why.
Ask them why. Yeah, and it's something I never grow tired of talking about, and I think it's the foundation for every good thing that comes from that is understanding that there's value in what we have, and that it's it's not guaranteed, right? There's threats out there, but with threats there's also opportunities, and I think that's where every ethic starts is with valuing it. So I feel so blessed to be in Martin County and to be raising my kids here, mostly raised.
I didn't even ask you how many kiddos you got.
There's 3.
That's
Two of them
great.
are in college somewhere.
Wow, really?
One of them.
You have older kiddos.
Yeah. And one of them's a junior at Jensen Beach.
Congrats, you're almost off the hook, right?
It's close. We can taste it. Just gets more expensive.
Yes, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Depends on how many of them are girls, right?
Girl on either end, guy in the middle.
There you go.
They're all great kids. We were
awesome.
Super blessed. I think the Lord knew if we didn't have great kids, we would have utterly failed.
It does give you a different perspective on what you're fighting for, I would say. Yeah. I definitely care a lot more for deeper reasons.
Yeah.
Before it was just I want to be able to surf and not have to worry about getting impetigo on my forehead.
That's a bad day in the water.
That's a bad day, Now it's more like, man, I wonder what...
Is that a thing?
Oh, it's awful. It didn't happen surfing, but it did happen to me during mini season. I went out, I dove through out in Peck Lake, I dove through I wasn't on air. It was just free diving 8-10 feet.
Wow.
Pulling them out, and I probably dove through 4 or 5 feet of whatever that hell is. It was coming out. I got impetigo where the mask hit my forehead, and I was so mad. I'm coming in here the next day with a rash on my forehead with my patients looking like a...
You shouldn't get that in the ocean.
It's awful. No. It really bothered me, because it's one thing to, you hear about discharges, or it's another thing that I can't even use the resource of where I live because of this kind of nonsense.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
I was pretty fired up.
That's a good illustration. I had my bout with that from a kid from Rochester, Minnesota at a wrestling tournament, but
impetigo, yeah.
But I wouldn't expect to get it on the reef.
Right, exactly. You'd think I was rolling around in the mud or something in cow patties. No, I'm diving. I'm just diving.
Wow.
Yeah. But now it's, what does this place look like for... I have a 5, 4, 2, and 6 month old. What's this place look like for Ella?
Yeah.
When she has kids.
Yeah. It's a great motivator, and I think it's not foolhardy to have a vision of restoration. I get some high eyebrows sometimes when I talk about being able to see the bottom in the North Fork of the St. Lucie River someday, and maybe that bottom's clean sand, right? I think if we don't have that vision, then we don't have any leadership happening.
100%. So I'm thankful that you have it. I am very thankful you're at the county.
Thank you.
I hope they never call you back to Key West and you never get that opportunity.
Yeah, just don't tell my family if there's an opportunity.
Yeah. Hopefully that never opens up and we can keep you as an asset.
Chris.
But thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure.
To be here.
Thank you, sir.
And maybe we'll check in the future.
You bet.
As things pop up, you can let me know.
Yep. You
All
bet.
right.
Thank you.